Hi, friends. Hello, the world. Welcome back to this episode of Tools for Transitioning Humanitarians podcast. And here is another tool that I want to introduce to you that is very dear to my heart. And the tool is evidence and how do we use it. And I have been observing some interesting trend among my clients, and I wanted to share. And based on that, I want to talk to you about when is evidence good to use and when it's not useful, and how do you know the difference, right? So the way that I have been observing recently, my clients telling me is that like a lot of the times our brains don't use evidence. Even if we have it, we don't use it if it's involved fear. So for instance, one of my clients is now making decision about changing careers, and then um, he was telling me all about how everything will fail, all things will not go, and he's so afraid of it, even though in the past he has made things work in the way that he wanted to. He got himself to a very nice career, but then he keeps telling now that he's not going to be able to do that again. And then when we were questioning, but is that really possible, or is that really an option? Because you have done it before in the past. You have made things work from scratch where there was no evidence. You made it work to the place that you wanted to. So why are you not using that evidence to build your confidence to make this work again, right? And the reason why I think our brains just do it so well is because we are so afraid, and we put ourselves in this loop of we can't make things work. And then as soon as if we use the evidence of the past that we can actually make it work, we have made it work before, then it will make us feel like confident, courageous enough to make the changes. And we're so afraid of those changes, and therefore our brain does not want to recognize that evidence and does not even use it, right? That's like so crazy, but our brains do that by saying that even though we have the evidence of the past to show that we have made it work, in the place where it didn't even exist, but now we're not even using it because we're so afraid of the change, and therefore we're like discarding that evidence, right? So that's why knowing how our brains use the evidence and how it doesn't use it even if we have the evidence is, I think, so crucial skill for all of us to know, especially when we're transitioning. Because in the transitioning, our brains want to like keep asking lots of questions of, oh, is this working, is this working, if it's not working, what am I going to do, right? If we get into this stage of like constantly asking, constantly wanting to have a reassurance that things are working, and therefore knowing how to use the evidence, or what evidence to use and what evidence not to use, becomes so crucial. And that's what I want to be talking about and giving you some clues. So the way that I want you to think about evidence is like you may ask, what is evidence that we're talking about, right? So evidence is basically any tangible or intangible result that we have currently. So tangible result could be like I don't know, the title or the job, the contract, or interview, or I don't know what else, the money that we earn, whatever it is the tangible result, the evidence of this is happening, this is here in our eyes, or we can touch it, we can see it. That's the tangible evidence, right? The result of some sort that we consider as an evidence of this is working or this is not working. And the intangible evidence is something like how we feel about things, right? So we feel anxious about it, we feel peaceful about it, we feel confident about it, we feel good about it, we don't feel good about it. And that's the evidence that we can also use to guide ourselves to go in places we want to, or not go in the places we want to. So that's the evidence I'm talking about. Now, when is evidence good to use and useful is the several things that I have observed. And therefore, I want to share from all of the experiences of my clients that I have been observing and my own. And then I will be also using, like showing you the places or the ways that you can watch out when the evidence is not useful to use or how your brain might not be using it, right? Like one of the things that I talked to you about is the fear, and I will be talking more about those. So let's look at the evidence that is useful to use and how we can actually use them, and that's amazing to use them, right? So one of the biggest ways that I love evidence for, but I love using it in my own life, is creating evidence from scratch or when that it didn't exist, right? So for instance, when I was leaving my previous job as a humanitarian, I was making about $10,000 per month. And I told myself back then that I want to create the same amount per month when I leave. And if I can make that happen, then it means that it's working, right? So now I went to creating my coaching practice. Of course, nothing existed back then. And of course, I could also sit around and say, oh, it doesn't work, nothing is there, starting things from scratch is horrible or difficult, and I could do that, but I chose not to focus on those things, even though my brain was like offering me those things in that moment. But instead of that, I chose to focus on how do I want to create evidence that it works from when it doesn't exist anything. There is nothing, right? So that's why I wanted to really like put my skills into practice of like believing in my abilities, believing in myself that I can make this work, and then start creating that evidence. And I find it such a great way to use the evidence in that way is creating something where it didn't exist before, and like showing to ourselves how amazing our brains are, how amazing our bodies and our feelings, our thoughts that can create new things that didn't exist before. So now that I have created so many of that evidence, that just shows me that I can create more of the things that I have never created before, or more of the things or tangible results or evidence that I can create where it doesn't exist anymore. And therefore, I was able to show to myself and also create the skill of creating evidence where it doesn't exist. And I would love to invite all of you to do that, especially those of you who are wanting to transition to a life where you don't need to worry about financial aspects, or you want to spend more time with your loved ones, right? And at the same time, working on something that's very meaningful to you, and you keep like using the evidence of, oh, this doesn't work and that doesn't work because of all these things. Instead of that, what if you focus your time and energy on creating something that you really want where it doesn't exist yet? And I think this is a great skill to have and to develop. And we all know how to do that because we all have created careers that didn't exist before. And of course, we could argue that those career paths already existed, so therefore it's easy. Maybe, but we would also agree, like many of us had to go through lots of different war zones or different humanitarian work that we never thought was even like existing in the world, and we went and created it, and we made our careers in that way, right? So that's why we know and we have this skill. It's just that maybe many of us are not aware of it, and that's why we don't even go for it in creating it. So that's one of the biggest invitation I invite you to doing it and creating the evidence where it doesn't exist. And it's one of the great way to use that evidence. Another great way to use that evidence could be to measure whether we're on the right track or not, and asks like useful questions, right? We tend to usually ask questions like, why am I like this? Why can't I do this? Why was I born this? Or why do I have this character? We tend to ask those type of very unuseful questions, which lead us to be feeling sorry for ourselves and feeling pity about ourselves. And I suggest not to use that at all, but instead use the evidence of what we have, currently, and ask the questions of, okay, how did I create this result? What are the thoughts that made me or brought me to creating this result? And do I really want to keep creating this result in my life or not, right? So one of the examples that I see often that many humanitarians do, which is they tend to say things like, oh, I don't have energy for this. Oh, I'm so tired. I'm so exhausted. And I just can't care enough to do this thing that I actually want to do, but I just don't have the energy for it, right? So when we keep having this narrative the whole time, and no wonder how we're tired by the end of the day and we don't want to do anything else but watch Netflix and distract ourselves, or drink things or eat things and distract ourselves, and not to actually work on the things that we want to work. So that's why when you have that type of evidence of feeling tired, which is an intangible evidence, right? Evidence showing that something is not right, in that moment, how can we use that to ask the question of, for instance, what am I actually tired about? What is it exactly that makes me tired? Let me have a look at it and analyze it, right? So do I really want to keep saying to myself that I'm tired, or actually there is a reason why I'm tired? And what is that exactly? And let me have a look. For instance, oftentimes we're tired of judgments of other people, judgment of ourselves, or keep criticizing everything around us, and then we just exhaust ourselves with all those type of thoughts, even though we may not have really actually done a lot of the work that would actually make us tired. And notice that there is also the difference between feeling tired for reasons that we want to be tired about, and feeling tired for reasons that we don't even want to be tired about, but we keep telling ourselves that we're tired, right? That's another topic of a conversation. But I just want to use that evidence that you keep feeling every day, and ask yourself, do you really want to feel this way anymore? And if not, what do you want to do? How do you want to use that evidence to shift yourself, your mindset, your energy level to a different energy, if you don't want to be feeling that anymore, right? So that's a great way to use evidence for. So let me look at my notes so that I don't forget anything. Okay, so these are the two things that I think evidence are good for to use. Now, evidence are not good to use, or our brains don't like to use those evidences, is one I said already. When fear is involved, our brains stop using all the evidence that we have of how amazing we are, how great we are, and what we do, how much experience we have. Our brains don't want to use that, because that would mean that we feel some level of confidence to start making changes, and our brains don't like changes. So that's why watch out when your brain does it, and how your brain may not be using the evidence that you are sitting on already to be further along, or pursuing what you want to do, right? So one of the classic examples that I see so many of my humanitarians do, which is like constantly not feeling confident about themselves. Even though they have arrived in such great positions in their organizations and high positions in their organizations, and everyone else would be looking at them like, wow, you're amazing. You've done all of this and all the other things. And but them themselves feeling like, I lack something, right? I lack the confidence, or I lack the joy, I lack the peace, whatever it is that we keep lacking, and the evidence of it, and we keep feeling like we need to have something else, or we need to search for something else, we need to arrive at the next um, uh, next position, so that we can finally feel that confidence, right? So, and that is not useful, because our brains are not recognizing what's happening of the past, all the achievements that we have. It's not using it, because we're just in the we just keep functioning in the pattern of something is missing, that we need to go somewhere, that we need to be somewhere, and therefore we keep being under the influence of that pattern, and therefore our brain does not even use the evidence that we have to feel confident. So that's why your job then is to, instead of using like all of this lacking energy, or I'm lacking this, I need to be there, I need to be here, instead of focusing on that, your job is then to feel confident. How do I feel confident? How do I use the evidence that I have from the past to feel confident? or how, like, what does confidence feel like, and does it really depend on the evidence of the external, um like the position I have and all the things? Or if it doesn't depend on them, then how do I feel the confidence myself without using that evidence, right? So that's why evidence in that case could be used in different ways. So on the one hand, evidence may not be helpful, because evidence of you having a high position in the organization, if it's not creating the feeling of confidence, then you're just not allowing yourself to feel it. So how else can you feel it? How else can you be the person who has achieved all of this and you couldn't have achieved it without that confidence, for instance? So that's why another way that like evidence is not useful is when I see this so often, is that we keep having or wanting a validation from external parties, right? So from our colleagues, from our bosses, that we're doing a great job, that we are an amazing staff, or maybe we're also seeking that validation from our loved ones, like that we are good in this relationship, or we're doing great, or we are being loved. We want to keep having that evidence. And if that is the case, we know that that evidence is not useful, simply because our brains want to keep seeking for more and more and more. It will never be enough. So that's why creating your internal validation is the best way to source your own energy, and the best way to reinforce your resources of believing in yourself, no matter what the external validation is. And also those type of evidence does not last. Their effect don't last. And in those situations, you can always ask yourself, why are you wanting to seek their validation, their evidence that this is working? And why can't you give yourself that evidence yourself? Right? So that is a good way to like shift your mind from keep seeking evidence from outside somewhere to show that this is working and you're doing a good job, but rather how can you create that within you? How can you really create that recognition within you so you don't need to seek for that validation? And another way that is evidence, using evidence is not useful, and this is something that I've been working on so much lately, which is don't let evidence make you feel in a particular way. And I know that this is one of the hardest things that I need to do, but also, like, for instance, we one of the easiest examples I can give you is that if we keep having those external validations, and then it makes us feel like good. For instance, they keep praising us and we feel good about it, and as soon as we lack that phrase, we're like all down and self-criticizing and self-beating. Or other way around, if people criticize us from outside, especially like maybe even constructive ones, but we're not really focusing on that, but we're just being down and feeling sad about that criticism, and then feeling like, oh my God, um, I'm not doing a good job, I'm not a good person, or all the things that we make it mean about ourselves, using that evidence coming from outside, right? Another way that I see that often in my clients' experience is when where um, like we keep having this paycheck every month when we're employed, and then let's say that if we decide to go and do something on our own, that will not be happening. But because we're so used to using that evidence as we're safe, or using that evidence as we are stable, and everything will be fine, as soon as we remove that evidence, then it becomes like everything's so uncertain or everything's so unsafe. And in those moments, how do we create that safety, and how do we create that certainty within us without relying on that external evidence, right? So that's why in those moments when we don't have that evidence outside, how do we still continue feeling safe and certain without needing the external thing to validate that we are going to be okay. And in that moment, it's so important then to rely on ourselves, on who we are and what we're capable of, instead of using that contract, using that payslip as a way to feel safe about ourselves, right? So that's why in those moments, those evidence of something lacking, for instance, is not a good way to use it and say, well, you see, because I'm lacking, that means that I can't really do it. I can't really create it, or I can't really be safe. But rather, how can we use the evidence of us being the person who can make this work and the abilities that we have already proved from the past, how can we use those to create and generate that safety and certainty without relying on that evidence outside? So that's why these are the key ways that I see how many humanitarians struggle with when it comes to using the evidence. They either use the evidence against themselves or use the evidence for themselves, and therefore they don't want to do anything and change anything about it. And that's why my really advocacy for you is, the way that I really want to encourage you to think about is, you can always decide how you want to use that evidence, whether it is there or not. Either if it's not there, how can you create that evidence for yourself? And if it is there, how you might not be using it, even though you could be using it, because the fear is so strong. So that's why recognizing it and also learning for yourself, how do you want to use the evidence you're using? Or rather, you can even ask yourself now is, how are you using the evidence that you have now, whether for yourself or against yourself? And how do you want to use it, right? So that's why I wanted to give you this tool to really be conscious about, how do I want to use the evidence to create what I want to, or how do I want to use the evidence to course correct it, or how do I want to use the evidence that is not even there and still feel safe and certain about myself to continue pursuing what I want to. So if you want to work on this and create the skill of using the evidence to your advantage, then you should absolutely come coach with me. I would love to coach you on this. And of course, I have tons of experience on my own and with my clients to show how to use any evidence to pursue what we want to. So come coach with me. Until then, have an amazing week, and I will speak to you very soon. Bye.